today, your instructor for the feature writing workshop is Mr. Roddy Batchasingh, who is a senior lecturer at COSTAATT for 14 years. During his time at the college, he has lectured over 20 courses in journalism, public relations, communication studies, and literature. Mr. Batchasingh was also the recipient of the British Council's Chevening Scholarship and holds a master's degree in international journalism with distinction from City University of London. Given his professional experience in corporate communications, advertising, consultancy, journalism, and education, I am very, very, very proud to hand you over to my friend and colleague, Mr. Roddy Batchasingh, who will take you through your workshop today. Mr. Batchasingh.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Lovely to meet all of you, and thank you very much for coming to the workshop. Every time I get a very nice intro, like my colleague has done for me, I always get worried that I have to now live up to a very good intro. But I hope that I do justice to today's workshop. I do understand that we are meeting some students from Siparia West today and Holy Faith Convent. Is that right? People could just confirm that for me.
Yes, sir. Holy Faith Convent.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure you all are able to use the chat. So you could please use the chat to say, because I want to hear your input on things that we look at today. Good, yeah. So please feel free to use the chat. I think chat will be a very useful device during today's class. Of course, you could always turn on your mic and ask a question as well, or put up your hand and ask a question. I just wanted to get a sense, and I'm looking at the chat here, to understand what forms each of you is in. So I just like to get that idea, if that's okay, please. Form 5. Okay, so Vanessa, Faith, Form 5. Kimora, you're Form 4. Tariq, am I saying your name correctly? Could you confirm if I am saying your name correctly?
It's Tariq.
Tariq, thank you. Tariq. And Tariq, what school are you from?
Tobago West Secondary.
Tobago West. Okay, great to have you today, man. Cool. Sharona, you're also Form 5. Great. Oh, Kimora is Form 5, Ashley is Form 4. And Kimora and Ashley, you're both from Holy Faith Convent, Cuba, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So today we're going to talk about feature article writing and feature writing. Now, the thing about feature writing, because in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, social media has been the dominant force in media and has actually grown in dominance. So it hasn't just been a dominant force, but it's becoming an even more dominating force. Sometimes it's hard for what we know as feature writing to still have a strong place in the landscape of content that you would engage with and digest and so forth, right? So I'm going to start by just sharing my screen here. Sophia, sorry, are you able to permit me to share my screen?
You can go ahead.
Great, thank you. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is look at a local magazine. I hope everyone can see this. And I'm just going to ask if people are familiar with this magazine or have ever heard of this magazine. Anyone can, sorry, I'm not seeing the chat at the moment. So, oh, here we go. Yeah. All right, so Vanessa says no. So I'm just going to say what this magazine is. It's Caribbean Beat, right? So if you've ever flown to Tobago, or you've flown to Miami, or if you've ever used Caribbean Airlines as your airline to fly to anywhere, when you go on the airline, you will encounter this magazine. It's an in-flight magazine and it's a free magazine, right? It's actually a very high quality and well-known in-flight magazine. It comes out monthly. And I just wanted to show you where you might encounter feature articles. So this Caribbean Beat magazine, I'm just going to flip some pages for you all. So just like now, of course, I know for the age group that I'm working with today, magazines are perhaps not the first and probably not the second or even third place that you might go to look for content. But I want to start here just to show where you might encounter feature articles, and then we'll go to different spots, right? So interestingly enough, you don't have to fly on Caribbean Airlines to be able to access a magazine. They actually are prepared to put it on their social media platforms, and they are also prepared to email it to you. So if you look here, and what I want people to understand about feature articles, it's generally a longer form of writing. And when I say a longer form of writing, it could be 800 words, it could be 1,500 words. A news article is generally about 400 to 500 words. And a news article tells you something very specific that happened. So the big news, or the most prominent news yesterday, is that there's the distinct possibility that electricity is going to become more expensive in our country. So a news article on that would talk about what happened and tell us what happened and tell us that there was a press conference held by the Regulated Industries Commission, and they have made recommendations to TNTech and to the government that electricity should go up, which means that it's going to be more expensive to keep your house cool if you have air conditioning units. It's going to be more expensive to cook. It's going to be more expensive to use any of your appliances and to use any of your devices at home, to charge your cell phones and so forth. So there would be a news article on that, and that news article would be very tight, telling us what's happening around the price of electricity going up. But a feature article on electricity going up would already assume that you probably know that electricity is going up, and then might interview families and small business owners and people who are doubles vendors and that sort of thing, and say, well, what does the price of electricity going up mean to you? So it'd be something of a human interest story, and it would talk about the impact on people's lives. So a feature article is got a longer shelf life. A news article generally has 1 day to share the information, and then the information goes stale very fast. A feature article can stay alive for a much longer time. It has a longer shelf life. You could read it a month after it was written, and it would still have some value for you, right? So just going through, again, just to give you the look and feel of the magazine, right? And as I said, it's called Caribbean Beat. So because it's Caribbean Beat, it's Caribbean centric. And now that I'm showing you a little bit, and I'm reminding you where you might find this magazine, that it's the in-flight magazine if you fly a Caribbean Airlines flight, even the flights to Tobago, and you could actually take the magazine off the plane for free. It's a takeaway. It's a complimentary magazine. I just want to ask, does anyone now feel as though that they've encountered it at least once in their lives? They've seen it once in their lives? I'm just looking at the chat to see. Okay, so some people have, right? Yeah, and the thing is, if you picked up the magazine and just looked at it, you might not remember that it was a Caribbean Beat magazine, but you might remember, oh, it was a nice looking magazine. It was actually a high quality magazine. In your hands, it actually feels and looks good. It's laid out nicely. It's very professionally done. And it's about things happening in the Caribbean, and also particularly things happening in Trinidad and Tobago. It's about cuisine, it's about festivals, it's about art, it's about books, it's about the history of the Caribbean. And this here would be an example of what a feature article would look like and how it would be laid out in a magazine. Now, how it's laid out on a website is completely different from how it's laid out in a magazine, but I'm giving you an idea of how it's laid out in a magazine, because this was, to a certain degree, the origin of feature articles. Feature articles, you would find them principally in magazines, you would find them in newspapers. And now that the world is moving on from hard copy, from physical, tangible magazines that you'd hold in your hand and read, people read on their tablets, people read on their phones, people read shorter content now, so you might not read a lot as much. You'll notice this is not a very long feature article, and there's a recipe here. And I want you to understand this. This is how some people will read a feature article. They'll look at the headline, they'll look at the picture, they might read this bit right here, right? They'll read this bit right here, and they read this bit right here, and look at the picture. They might glance at the recipe and say, you know, if this is a recipe of something I actually want to make, I'll read it. I might take a picture of it. I might look for it online, if they had the hard copy in front of them. Some people might read the first paragraph, and some people, if they like the first paragraph, will carry on reading because the first paragraph was engaging, it gripped them, it held their attention, it was conversational, it made you feel like it was worth spending time with the article, and it made you feel like, I would like to know more. I would like to know more. And sometimes you're a captive audience. An in-flight magazine is a good idea because very often, if you're on a flight, you don't always have Wi-Fi. You may not have content to consume otherwise. You might be more inclined to read a magazine there. I will say that the opening paragraph of a feature article and the first few opening paragraphs, so the opening paragraph and maybe the first 3 paragraphs are really the most crucial part of a feature article. You cannot wait to get to the middle of a feature article for the writing to become impressive. People will not give you more than 10 seconds of their attention, and some people will not even give you 10 seconds. They will not extend 10 seconds to you. So the opening lines, the opening paragraph of any feature article you're writing has to be compelling, unless the audience has an inherent, genuine interest in that particular topic. So just pushing on a little bit, just to show you about layout. This is about romantic locations in the Caribbean. And again, you see the mixture of pictures and text. And you see it's trying to use more imagery than it is using text. And when it uses text, this text refers to this picture, this text refers to this picture. So they're not making it too text heavy. They're making it, we live in an age of image. We live in an age of visuals, and people are communicating visually. So they want to see strong visuals and a little bit of text. When you have less text, the text has to be high quality. And I want people to understand that text has to be high quality. And many people look at the pictures, maybe read a little bit of text. Many people just look at the pictures and read the headlines. There's a study that said 80% of people look at the headlines and the pictures and they say, all right, I got it, right? But people who do read the feature articles and people who write the feature articles, and it's very, very possible to have a career as a writer where you're doing different types of writing, feature article writing, news writing, copywriting. A person who has a career as a writer and gets paid to be a professional writer has to do many different types of writing, not just one type of writing. You have to be versatile as a writer, especially in a country like Trinidad and Tobago, where it's essentially a small market. So if you are a writer and you create social media content in both video and text form, you still need to be able to write a feature article when it's required, a news report when it's required. You need to be able to write what we describe as copywriting, which is writing taglines and slogans to go with ads, captioning pictures on social media, all of that is crucial. So the quality of your writing, less writing you do, the higher the quality has to be. And I want people to remember that. So I'm going to come away from the Caribbean beat now, but you get the idea that the photography in the magazine is also really high quality. It really is a high quality magazine, and magazine has survived in a time when magazines do not survive, because it is still very much a high quality magazine. I would say it's the best magazine to come out of the English speaking Caribbean, and it's really remarkable that it's free. I don't know if people here know there's a magazine that used to be given away for free, but it was a clever idea to give it away for free as well. Scorch. People know Scorch? I'm just asking in the chat if people have ever picked up a Scorch magazine or know of the Scorch magazine. People, all right, yeah. Scorch didn't survive for a very, very long time, but while it was around, it was actually quite popular. It was around for a couple of years. It was a magazine about party culture and fashion and beauty, and it was a small magazine. And when I say small, it could fit in your back pocket, but it was very, very strong on optics, very strong on optics, very strong on small text, and very, very Trinidad centric. Yeah. So let me come out of. Right. I'm going to show you another type of website now. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I want to show you what some magazines have become, right? I'm going to show you Teen Vogue, and I'm also going to show you, this is GQ. I don't know if people have ever heard of GQ magazine. And GQ magazine, again, most magazines, international magazines, have now essentially become websites, and they will give you website content. Here's an example of what GQ looks like as a website, and many of their articles are now free. And the way they make money is by the number of people they could attract to the website and the advertising revenue made from visits to the website. So they're looking at traffic at the website and the number of people who come to the website. People know this gentleman? So this is an example. Yeah, let me just see. Yeah, people have heard of him. Yes, I understand that he's quite popular. Timothy Chalamet. Someone say his name for me, please.
Timothy Chalamet.
Right, good, good. So this is an example of a feature article that's called a personality profile. A personality profile is specifically about him. So it's an article about him. And I'm going to jump to different articles just to give you an example of how things go. But this is an example of an article about him, right? And again, that particular edition of GQ, he had the cover of the magazine, the electronic cover, because there are hard copies of the magazines that you could buy, but he also had this soft cover. He also had the electronic cover of the magazine. So just like how I showed you that Caribbean Beat, and the Caribbean Beat had a cover. So he had this cover here. If you are a fan of this particular actor, you might be very inclined to read this article, right? So that's how some personality profiles work. If you are a fan of a particular person, and also if you've heard about this person and you said, well, this person's popular or well-known, but I don't know a lot about him, so I might be open to finding out a little bit about him, you might read the article. And again, the way you decide if you're going to read the article is often by the first few paragraphs, right? So it starts here by saying, I'm just going to let people read just the first two paragraphs here, just right here. Okay, now I want you to, when you read those first two paragraphs, I just want people to say on the chat, would they have continued with the article? So just now, of course, some people go like, I'm not a fan of his. I don't really particularly care about him and his life and his work. So I'm not interested. I don't have the time. I'm not going to extend the effort. But just based on the first 2 paragraphs, would you have carried on reading about him just after reading those first 2 paragraphs? I'm just going to look at the chat to hear what people might have said. Okay. Yeah, quite a few. Yeah. All right. So it's all yeses, all yeses. And actually, so I like what Kimura said. Yes, because of the hook, that opening paragraph is very solid. And actually, so for a person like me, I don't know him very well, and because of my age demographic, I might be more interested in actors of my generation, of people closer to my age, right? But when I read this opening line, it actually makes him sound like a very intelligent, contemplative, deep person. You know, it makes him sound like a very interesting person. It makes him sound like he cares about his craft. He cares about acting. He cares about his profession. He understands his profession to a certain degree. And now, the person who wrote this article would have interviewed this actor for many, many hours and would have gotten thousands of words of content and thousands of words of quotes. The writer has to sit down and say to himself, what's a good quote to lead with that will make people want to stay with this article? And this article is longer. This article is about 3,000 words. The writer is asking a lot of you to stay with this article. And say, listen, if I'm going to get people to stay with me for 5 paragraphs, 7 paragraphs, 12 paragraphs, I have to be good from paragraph 1, then I have to be good in paragraph 2, then I have to be good in paragraph 3, and I have to keep going and keep the person interested. And I have to make them feel like we're almost having a conversation. And I want you to understand something about feature writing. Because when you're in school, a lot of the writing that you do is academic writing, right? It's academic writing, it's essay writing, it's analytical writing, and that's very valuable. It is very valuable. But when you're writing a feature article, you can afford to take some, afford to channel some artistic tendencies, and you could channel those creative tendencies into the way you write the article, right? So I would say that in feature writing, you do have the latitude to be a little more inventive, to be a little more creative, to be a little more poetic, to be, and this is the key word, a little more conversational. It's conversational. You have to remember, the thing about feature article writing, no one is obligated to do it at all. No one's obligated to read your feature article. This is a person taking their precious leisure time that they could use to be on social media or do anything else, and taking that leisure time and spending it reading this article. So the article better be engaging and to a certain degree entertaining and a certain degree enjoyable to read. So I want people to understand that the opening part of an article, of a feature article, is the most crucial part of it. Now, of course, you have to lead into a very good body and develop the body of the article and keep people in your company. But sometimes the way we measure success in feature article writing is if your article is 20 paragraphs long and you got people to stay with you for 10 paragraphs, you've done very, very well. Because people have 10 tabs open and their phone going and all sorts of things happening on their tablet around them constantly. Notifications on your phone happening. And because you're inundated or there's great competition for your attention, it's hard to concentrate for a sustained amount of time on a feature article. But if you could get someone to stay with you for a number of paragraphs, then you've done well. And usually when people have stayed with you for a certain number of paragraphs, if you wrote something that's 10 paragraphs long, if people have stayed with you 6 paragraphs, they're going to stay till the end because they say, well, listen, I'm this far in, I might as well see how it ends. So I want to see how the article ends, you know? So I want to encourage people and I'm going to stop sharing again. I want to encourage people to understand that the environment, the media environment that you are in, and the information environment you are in, it's a hyper-competitive environment. And I would say that feature articles do not normally rate as the first place that a person would go for information. Feature articles really are for fans of a particular thing. So if you're a fan of a particular sport and maybe a particular team, you might read up more deeply on that team. If you're a fan of a particular actress or a particular actor or a particular influencer, you might seek out more information on that influencer. So that's what feature articles are about to a certain degree. I want to just now share. And let me just ask people in class, and again, I'm looking at the chat so you could tell me, right? If you wanted to read up on someone, say like a particular musical artist in Trinidad, where would you go to find that information? Where would you go to read up more on them? Would it be that Instagram account of the artist? Would it be, I wanna find out from people.
Can you repeat?
Go ahead, may I hear you?
Can you repeat the question?
Right. Sorry, because of the feedback. You can post it, you can put it in the chat. So Wikipedia page and social media platforms. Yeah. Now, would you be prepared to read a long article on that person? Something that's 1,000 words long? And that's an interesting thing. Would you be prepared to read something that's 1,000 words long on that particular person? Right. And it really depends on if you're a fan to a certain degree. It does depend on if you're a fan to a certain degree. I'm just gonna now share a website here. And again, this is Teen Vogue. Yeah. Right. And I'm just gonna go through the website just a little bit, not for very long, but I just wanted to get the sense if this would be something that people might be inclined to go to, right? So an article like this, Sophie Turner and Joe Jonas speak out, and we look forward to being great co-parents. Just a heady inherent interest, because I know there's something that we say in journalism. And what we say is news is people. News is people. So readers want to read about people. They don't want to necessarily read about concepts. They don't want to read about, say, inflation. They want to hear about how prices rising affects people and hurts people, or how 1%ers might benefit from prices rising, how the working class might suffer as a result of the prices rising. They want to hear about the impact on people, but they don't just want to hear that things are going up in price, right? Now, because people are what we're inherently interested in, as a result, celebrity culture is very potent. Celebrity culture is very potent. People read up on celebrities, people follow celebrities, people are interested in celebrities. And therefore, what celebrities do with their lives, and some of you might be aware that this couple here presently I think are going through I don't know if they're formally divorced or they're pursuing a divorce, but that's happening between them right now. And she's famously from Game of Thrones, for those of you who know that series. He is a singer from the Jonas Brothers, and anything like that, anything playing out in public like that is bound to draw people's attention. And they're saying here, we're looking forward to being great co-parents, in the sense that now that it says here, the former couple agreed on a new custody deal through. So this is an example of picture, headline, lead in. This is actually called a strap. So just, if you see the picture of them when they were happy together, the headline, which is a longish headline, and in a way it tells the whole story, Then this strap that says the former couple agreed on a new custody deal through early 2024. You could then decide if this is worth your time and attention. And if you were to click on it, you then decide, well, how much of it am I going to read and what the opening line is, right? You see the author there. So again, if you have an inherent interest in this, you might read on. If you do not have an inherent interest, you might still read on a little bit. I'm just going to let people read the first 2 paragraphs, and then you're going to tell me if this is something that you might have pursued or not. Right? Okay. So you've had the first 2 paragraphs. Looking at the chat to see if people would have read on or not. Faith, good. Right. Thank you, Camellia. Tariq, I'm hoping I'm saying your name right. Tariq. Kimura, thank you. Sharona said that she might have. Good. I appreciate that. So some people say no, some people say yes. So we've got 1 yes and several no's. So for a person who liked the Chalamet article, but feels like it mightn't read on here, why does the Timothy Chalamet article win for you? Anyone could answer. Anyone who preferred the Chalamet article. And by the way, I think there are good reasons to choose the Chalamet article, but I just want to hear. You could either turn on your mic or you could say it in the chat. And Sharona, in the meantime, could you tell me why you're interested in pursuing this article? Why would you have read on? Right. So Sharona, you could actually turn on your mic and say, if you're able to turn on your mic. I know it might be several of you.
Mr. Batchasingh, I'm seeing Kimura's hand up.
Oh yeah, Kimura, go ahead, please.
Well,
Sorry, I didn't see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just to answer your question, I think that the book was more interesting in the Charlie one. Not that I'm actually a fan of him, but it was more of a general idea. As he said, he sounded like a genuine, deep person. So I think that was interesting to pretty much hear a point of view from a celebrity and their life. But this, I didn't really. This is more of their life, so this is just a first topic for me, first of reference. So that's why I found it less interesting than Timothy Chalamet piece.
Yeah, so that essentially Chalamet starts with an idea that's a relatable idea, notion that we all have multiple personalities, and it was nicely put, that all of them are at the dining table at the same time, and he has to service the needs of all these different personalities that he's played in films, and then personalities he's not shared with the public. And that we're all very multifaceted, and we all have different roles that we play in life. Some of you are a significant other, some of you are sons, daughters. You have a role as a cousin, you have a role as a big brother or a younger sibling. There's so many different roles that we occupy. The role as student, the role of being a person in your community, and each role is a slightly different version of who we are, you know. Whereas this is, as you say, very, very rooted in their lives, and you almost need to have an inherent interest in what they're doing to sort of pursue it. Faith says, for me, I think it would be because that a celebrity's business should not be on the internet as it's there. Yeah. So Faith, that's really good. Respecting their privacy. And by the way, this is a really delicate situation. It involves very small children, involves separation and families being sort of split apart and living in separate homes and separate continents and that sort of thing. So I like what Faith said, that, you know, essentially, this is us almost prying into something that is very, very delicate, very painful, and very personal. Whereas the article on Timothy Chalamet is an article where he's discussing what it's like to do his job and sharing that information, almost willfully sharing that information with you. He's willing to, and you don't feel sordid for participating in that engagement of sharing in that information, you know. So that's a very, very good distinction, Faith. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to look now at, so we had a look at Teen Vogue, and again, places that you would see feature articles. So we looked at Caribbean Beat, we looked at GQ Magazine, we looked at Teen Vogue. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment here. Right. And I want to look at, I'm just gonna share a PowerPoint with you here. Actually, no, just before I share that PowerPoint, I want to share an article. And this is a old article on a very, very famous episode happening in Trinidad and Tobago, right? Very, very famous episode happening in Trinidad and Tobago. The article is from an international magazine. Some of you will know the magazine, Time magazine. And again, for people of a certain age group, and particularly for people of my age group, I'm in my 40s, Time magazine is no one, you know, it's an iconic magazine. Everyone has heard of it. Many people grew up reading it and so forth. It does not have the power that it did when I was a young person. So I just want to ask if people have I just want to canvass and see if people have heard of Time magazine, right? Because again, because we live in a different age now, it's quite possible that people have not heard of it. Time magazine still does something called Time Individual of the Year. Last year's Time magazine Individual of the Year was the leader of Ukraine. As you know, there's a war on between the Ukraine and Russia. So Vladimir Zelensky was the Time magazine Person of the Year. And Time magazine names a Person of the Year every year, and has done so since the 1930s. But I just want to see in the chat if people have heard of Time magazine. Just looking, right? And it's fine if you have not. That's completely fine because you can't know everything about everything. But I just want to see yes or no. And I'm just looking at the chat now. So you could just say yes or no if you've ever heard of Time magazine. Okay, thank you, Faith. Anyone else?
Hi, sir. Can you repeat what you asked, if you ever heard that?
Kimura, are you hearing me?
Yeah, can you repeat what you said?
Right. I'm just asking if, and I'm hoping you all are hearing me clearly, if anyone in class has heard of Time magazine, if anyone in class has heard of Time magazine. Kimura said yes, good. And all right, yeah, so some people have not. Right. So in 1990, there is no Google and there's no Facebook, and there are very, very few international platforms. And because we had a very, very famous incident happening in 1990 in Trinidad and Tobago, which was the 1990 coup, which is when our parliament building had became the center of a hostage crisis. There was an attempt to overthrow the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The prime minister was held hostage. The prime minister at the time, his name was A.N.R. Robinson, now deceased, was shot in his leg and was almost killed, in fact. There were 7 cabinet ministers, including people like the Minister of Health and so forth, who were also held hostage. Overall, more than 30 people were killed that day, and over 150 people wounded in Trinidad and Tobago, in the parliament, at the Red House, right? I want to just look in the chat. Who was the leader of the coup? And I'm just looking on the chat just to see anyone answer that. Who's the leader of the coup? Who's the person who led the insurrection, or led the revolution, or attempted revolution, attempt to overthrow the government? Abu Bakr, great. Kimura, thank you, Abu Bakr. A very, very famous man in Trinidad and Tobago. It's possible, and again, I don't like to presume that people, what I know, other people know. So we have heard of Abu Bakr. We know that he died very recently. Yeah, good. Thank you, Faith. Good. Glad to see that he's well known. Yazin Abu Bakr. And even he died recently at the age of 80. He was about 47 years old when he was the leader of the coup. It's interesting how things unfolded with the coup. But he is a very, very famous person in Trinidad and Tobago. He's really, really well known. His family is well known. His son, one of his sons, is actually played football for the Trinidad and Tobago national football team, the Soca Warriors. And he's a father of 14 children, so he has quite a number of children still around doing very interesting and noble things in Trinidad and Tobago. I wanted to just point to you or take you to a little area in this article written by Time magazine in 1990, right, which is almost 35 years ago, not quite 35 years ago, but almost 35 years ago, right, about the coup that took place, right? And I just want you to, first of all, read this paragraph here that I'm about to highlight, right? This paragraph here. Okay, so I hope everyone has read it. I will now read it. Now that you have read it, you have it in your head. Now I'm going to read it. It says, after 5 days, at least 30 dead and 150 wounded, Yazin Abubakar, leader of the abortive coup, emerged from the television broadcast building in Port of Spain and laid down his rifle. Allah is the greatest, he said, then stood in the pouring rain as 70 of his followers added their arms to the growing pile of weapons and were taken into custody by Trinidadian soldiers. The rebels are expected to face criminal charges of treason, murder, and kidnapping, and then could be hanged if found guilty. And then, as you know, the Privy Council ended up upholding amnesty agreement that Abubakar and his Muslim group had signed. An amnesty agreement was made for the hostage crisis to end, and they were supposed to be not entirely exonerated, but not punished for what had happened, right? Now, there's another paragraph I'm going to have you read right here. And I want you to just, when you read this paragraph, tell me if you learn anything new about Abubakar in this paragraph, right here, right? And you just read it to yourself and tell me, is there anything new you learn about Abubakar? Okay, good. Kimora, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
So after reading it, I would say everyone knows that people have a different opinions on this coup and everything. I would have often grown up hearing people talk about how this was a really bad situation, but I kind of got introduced to a new take on this, that his reasons weren't all bad. Basically, where they said that he would have great drugs, corruption, and poverty. He probably had his reasons, aside from religious beliefs and everything. I believe that he would have done this due to for political ruling, basically, for poor people and everything like that. That's what I would have taken from this. So.
Right, that's a very good take on it, Kimora. And by the way, it also shows how, as time goes by, people, as history goes forward, people look back and develop perhaps an evolving perspective and a new perspective on his actions and the actions of his group and what the intention was. And some people, when this had now happened, and I was a teenager when this had now happened, the years afterwards, 1991, 92, 93, 94, there was a huge amount of dislike and, or I would almost say hatred of Abubakar. But as the decades went on, people look back on it a little bit differently. You know. I do want to just see in the chat, people tell me anything that they read in that paragraph that they just discovered about Abubakar, that they just found out about Abubakar in that paragraph that they did not know before. Some of it you might have known, some of it you might have learned recently. But anything that you hear in that paragraph and you kind of go like, hey, well, that's interesting. I only had this one idea of him. The main thing I know about him is that he is devoutly Muslim, and he was involved in this massively historical and violent uprising that was quelled, right? Did anyone know that he had gone to Canada to study engineering? And he actually could have had a very, very different life He could have ended up just living in Canada. He could have ended up studying engineering and coming back to Trinidad and Tobago, which at that time was an oil-rich economy, and working as an engineer and making huge sums of money and having a nice mansion to live in somewhere as a well-to-do petroleum engineer. You know, he could have had a very, very different life. So, right, Kimura, thank you very much. So he went to Canada to study engineering. And by the way, it suggests that he was certainly bright enough to study, to go to university, to study something really quite hard. And that he was capable and he had ambition and he had a plan. And his time in Canada sort of changed him a bit. How about that his name was Lennox Phillip? Anybody finds that new information to you, that his name was Lennox Phillip? Because for a very, very long time, people presume he was born Muslim and grew up Muslim and was always Muslim. And not that he had actually become, not that he was a person who, and you know, actually because of his death recently, a lot of information about his life sort of came out. But for many, many years, people very often just assumed that he was born Muslim, that he grew up Muslim, that it was not a religious conversion. And a very famous religious conversion happens to someone who becomes Malcolm X. Malcolm X wasn't always an Islamic leader. Like Lennox Phillip, he was born Malcolm Little. That was his name, Malcolm Little, and then he becomes the famous boxer Muhammad Ali, wasn't born Muslim. How about that he was a former policeman? People know that he was a former policeman. Kimura said no. Former policeman, huh? Former policeman knows how. I came back to Trinidad, and well, he had gone to study engineering, but he had worked in the police force. He was part of the mounted branch. That's the branch that deals with horses and so forth. It's interesting that he was a policeman because he would have been a man to uphold law and order, you know. And back when he became a policeman, he might have been a person who was very devoted to the idea of law and order, you know. So what I want to point to about feature article writing, and this is a feature article written by Time Magazine on the coup and all the things that happened in the coup. But it comes out, and I want you to see this, right? It comes out on August 13th, and the coup was on July 27th. So it's not giving you the news from the day before. It's a contemplative piece, and it's an analytical piece, and it's a piece that's looking at the context in which this happens. And it gives you additional, it makes Abu Bakr, at the very least, a three-dimensional person. So he's not just a flat character with one dimension. And if you think of a good Netflix series, even the villains have a very good backstory, right? So they make Abu Bakr, and a feature article has the power to do this because it has the space and it has, because it's not being written as a news report and it's not just trying to be factual, purely factual. It is being descriptive, and it's almost like novel writing in a sense. It's almost like you are fleshing out a character and you're explaining to us who he is. And in reading, and I like that Kimura noticed this, in this simple paragraph, it's not a long paragraph, but in this simple paragraph, it's loaded with information about Trinidad, about the Muslim population of Trinidad, about where Abu Bakr lived and how he, what was his potential motivations for why he did what he did. And good feature article writing does that. It does not waste the reader's time, because readers are deeply impatient nowadays, and especially because of social media, even more impatient because we just don't have the time or the focus to read very much. So a small quantity of writing can give you a lot of very valuable information. And that's what this does. It tells us that his name was Lennox Phillip. It tells us that he went to Canada to study engineering. It tells us that he had a conversion to Islam that was a sort of ideological conversion that made him into a person who wanted to be involved in seeking justice, you know. So I want people to see that as a writer in 2023, when you write, you have to realize that quality of your writing has to be gripping to a certain degree, and you have to be giving valuable information, because you're competing with very, very small, you'll get a very small text post of one sentence that is very clever, and people are getting into the habit of just reading very, very small quantities of work and very small quantities of words. And whenever you write and you say, listen, I'm going to write something that's 500 words, you have to almost think of your reader as wanting to leave the article, and what are you doing in the article to make them stay? And one of the things you do in the article to make them stay is give them new information that they have not heard before. If you give them new information that they have not heard before, they're more inclined to say, you know what, I'll stay here for a little bit longer, because the longer I stay, the more I know. And what I find out in this article, I could post later, you know? So I want people to understand that when you construct an article, you have to think about, you cannot only rely on information that people are very, very likely to know. Because it appears unoriginal. It does not seem particularly invigorating to the reader. And to a certain degree, you're almost setting up a situation where the reader is very inclined to leave the article and go off and do something else. And then, not that it was a waste of energy to write the article, but ultimately, when you write an article, you would hope that at least some readers get to the end of the article. Yeah. So I'm just going to share now a PowerPoint. And after I share this PowerPoint, we're going to come up to an activity very soon that I want to ask you all to do. But this here is called examples of different types of opening paragraphs, right? Examples of different types of opening paragraphs, feature writing. Actually, just before I show you that, let me just, I'm going to ask you to write some opening paragraphs very soon, but I just want to show you just as I have it up, I'm just going to share a few very quick pictures with you about that paragraph that you just read. This is the young Yasmin. This is the young Imam Abu Bakr on the right-hand side, who participated in the coup. This is him much older, outside of the halls of justice. You would have seen Gaddafi mentioned in that paragraph. Gaddafi was a former dictator of a country called Libya in the continent of Africa, Northwest Africa. And he had a very close relationship with Abu Bakr and would have helped with supplying weapons to him. This is a person whose name is Abu Bakr, now deceased, I believe, who was at one point the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. This is, I mentioned, Abu Bakr's son, who plays for the Soca Warriors. And this is another of his very famous sons, who was the leader of a political party for a short time. Stop sharing this one and then jump to, right. So I want to just show some quick examples of different types of opening paragraphs that we could look at. And I would again emphasize opening lines of your feature article generally are the most important lines in your feature article. Having said that, you'll notice that the paragraph that I showed you on Abu Bakr was certainly in the body of that feature article. The opening lines were not particularly strong in that feature article that I showed you on Abu Bakr. If I didn't show you the opening lines, but I showed you the middle paragraphs that I wanted you to pay attention to. Back then, the dynamics of readership were a little bit different, and people were in 1990, perhaps more inclined just to read an article, and therefore you could almost bury the very good parts in the middle of the feature article and towards the end of the feature article. Nowadays, you need to serve dessert first. And I want you to remember that phrase, serve dessert first. Give the best part of the meal at the very beginning. Don't leave dessert for last. I know that's not how it works in real life, but in writing, serve dessert first. Start with the best part of the meal first. Start with the most enjoyable part of the meal first. Offer that to the reader first. Let them enjoy themselves. Let them be drawn in. If they leave in the middle, they've read half the article. And usually if they make it to the middle, they're already invested in the article. They're already committed to it to a certain degree. So they're likely to stay to the end, right? So opening lines. And I just wanted to say, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but these are different approaches that you could take. And since you're about to write some opening lines for us, these are different approaches that you could take in the way that you write opening paragraphs, right? You could write them, sorry, I'm just trying to move, right? You could write a strong, provocative, intriguing statement, and I'm going to give you an example of that. You could do a narrative, anecdotal opening. And I would say that the Chalamet feature article was a strong, provocative / intriguing. I would say it was an intriguing opening. It was an intriguing opening. And it started basically in the middle. It started basically in the middle because that phrase that he used, that description of what acting means to him and his approach to acting, probably came somewhere, that quote, that soundbite that he gave, probably came somewhere in the middle of the interview. If they interviewed him for 2 hours, he probably said that deep in the interview. But the writer said, you know what, I'm going to lead with that. So he starts with that intriguing statement. You could have a narrative / anecdotal opening, and I'll give you an example of that. People know the rapper Drake. I have a narrative / anecdotal opening for him. You could start with something that describes a scene, and I have an example of that for you. You could do something, you could start an intro that starts with a question or an intro that starts with a quotation, right? But the whole idea about doing strong intros, and by the way, strong intros are crucial not just in feature article writing. They're crucial in movies. They're crucial in the way that a series begins. It's crucial in any art form nowadays, actually, and particularly any art form that has to be consumed by an audience that unfolds a story. So here's an example of a description / scene setting, and it's from a magazine, but I want you to just read this opening paragraph here. And then people will tell me in the chat what they think is happening in this opening paragraph. So just take 10 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds, and take your time and read that opening paragraph. Okay, good. So I'd like people, now, of course, this article would have been laid out in a magazine or on a website, and you would have had a headline and you would have had a picture, but you don't have the benefit of the headline or the picture. You just have the opening paragraph. So I want people to just say in the chat what they think this opening paragraph is about, what this opening paragraph is meant to tell us. Kamara has already put something. Thank you, Kamara. And you could say the same thing. You could say what you think. Okay, I like Kamara's answer. And I think many of you would agree that Kamara's answer is correct. So Kamara started off with arranged marriage. Yes, it is an arranged marriage, but it's more than arranged marriage. It's child marriage. And I like that she said, actually, it's a child marriage, right? Faith, thank you, tells us of 2 children that are being forced into marriage. Yes, thank you, Faith. That's excellent. Thank you. Anybody else wishes to put up something, they can. But thank you very much, Faith. It tells us of 2 children. Right. Thank you, Kamara. Right. And thank you, Ashley, for starting with it. Certainly is an arranged marriage. These 2 children have not decided to marry each other. And now Now, I have to say, if it was laid out on a website or it was laid out graphically, you would have seen pictures that would have clued you in, and you would have seen a headline that would have clued you in. But something about this opening paragraph really captures the tragedy of what's happening here. So it says, the groom fell asleep in his mother's lap. Now, when you read that, actually, you say the groom fell asleep in his mother's lap, and you think to yourself, this is a real mama's boy. You know, like this man fell asleep in his mother's lap. The groomer. So the groom fell asleep in his mother's lap. And the bride burst into tears and had to be silenced with a piece of fruit. Then you kind of go like, huh? All right, I can see up to the bride burst into tears, you could almost say, this is a certain picture I was painting in my head. And then you said, and had to be silenced with a piece of fruit. And you go like, I don't know if fruit would really solve anybody's problems here, you know. And then it says, Danraj was 4, his bride Sharma was 7. The wedding, which would change their lives forever, meant nothing to them. And I think that's really a scintillatingly good line. The wedding, which would change their lives forever, meant nothing to them. And it also showed that they had no choice in the matter, that this is a violation of a child's rights. This is a violation of human rights. It's really problematic. And when I say it's really problematic, because some people could argue, well, listen, this is a cultural practice. But some human rights are universal. And you can argue that universally, no matter what culture you're from, a child has a right to be a child, and therefore has the right to one day, perhaps as an adult, choose this pursuit of married life, right? So Vanessa says they're being forced into marriage at a young age. And yeah, it's almost, you read it and you kind of go like, this is abuse, you know, because even though, by the way, in the culture that it obtains in, it might be culturally acceptable. And I want to say that this article is written about something that was happening in a part of India. But you have to remember, India is a very, very large country. It's 1.4 billion people. And when I say 1.4 billion, a billion is 1,000 million. Trinidad has 1.4 million people. So for every Trinidadian in Trinidad, there's 1,000 Indians in India, Indian citizens in India. So it's a very, very large country. And this practice is not necessarily widespread. But in a huge country like that, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and it does happen. And it does happen up to today, right? Because it is a very large country with huge quantities of people and very large rural areas. And in some areas, very, very, very still, this tradition is upheld. But if you look at this, it was their parents who recited the marriage vows, their parents who circled the sacred fire 7 times on their small and sleepy children's behalf. So they're small and, well, you know, children are temperamental. They're bound to get sleepy. They're bound to get thirsty. They're bound to get fed up and tired of a long ceremony. They may not understand that they are the celebrants of this ceremony, that they are the bride and groom. But I think something about this article, and what I like about this article, is fast. It's fast. The opening is fast, in the sense that by the end of the paragraph, you know exactly what's going on. You know who Danraj is, you know who Sharma is, you know their ages, you know that they're being forced into child marriage. You hear that, you now understand why Danraj fell asleep in his mother's lap. You understand why the bride burst into tears and needed to be appeased with a piece of fruit. And you also understand, so you understand the micro elements of the article, which are these 2 characters, these 2 children who are named, Danraj and Sharma. But you do now understand the macro, the larger context of the article, which is these 2 children are being forced into something. And this is why this line here is such a good line. Sorry. This line here, the wedding, which would change their lives forever, meant nothing to them. It would change their lives forever, but it meant nothing to them because they were children and they didn't even understand what was really happening and the implications of what was happening. So that's a really, now if you read that opening paragraph, even if you're not inherently interested in this issue, you might be inclined to go on. You might be inclined to go on just to see how it turns out with these two children. Or just, and by the way, maybe 5 paragraphs in, you kind of go like, okay, well, I'm good, you know, because it started to talk, the article started to talk about the law and what the UN thinks about it and what this NGO is on the ground doing about it. And then you kind of go like, okay, well, I've gotten into the article as much as I want to get into the article, but I'm good. But if you read the first 5 paragraphs, then the writer would have done something very useful because they would have ignited an interest in you, or they would have at least engaged you or made you aware that this is happening in the world, that something like this is going on and it's a problem, and also help you to form an opinion on it. So sometimes you have to read a whole article for you to develop a certain amount of understanding about what's going on. So I wanted to share this with you just to and by the way, you know what I particularly like about this opening paragraph too, is that somehow this writer was able to make you care about these 2 children to a certain degree. In not very many words, in just a paragraph, somehow this writer was able to make you care, even though you don't know these 2 little children, but you were able to feel a little pain for them because you're just saying to yourself, but they're just children. They're just children. Look how much of a child he is. He fell asleep on his mother's lap. Look how much of a child she is. She's eating a piece of fruit and she's bursting into tears, and the parents have to do everything for them and they don't even know what's happening. So you almost feel the writer, in the way that she wrote this paragraph, was able to develop a sense of injustice without screaming out to you, this is unjust. And that's really, really clever writing. And by the way, I want everyone in this class to understand this. Most of writing is rewriting. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Most writing is rewriting. So the person who wrote this paragraph did not write it in one go, did not sit down at their computer and just come up with this paragraph. They may have wrote a version of it and then had to fix it and had to edit it and then had to take things out and had to add things in and had to fix it up again and probably went to sleep and then woke up the next day and looked at it again and fixed it again and fixed it again until it was good. So I want people to understand that your first attempt at writing an opening paragraph is just your first attempt. It's just your first draft. It does not have to be perfect, and no writing has to be perfect, but you want to aim for excellence. And what you're doing here is you don't have to expect that your first attempt at putting it on your screen will be exactly how you want it. Your first attempt is you just getting it down so you could look at it, and then you can manipulate it and you can add things to it and you could fix the first line. And by putting it down on the screen, you would have developed a platform for building on it and changing it and coming up with better ideas and coming up with better poetry and better words to put in it. So editing is really crucial in feature writing, and I want people to understand that. It's crucial in all the writing that you do. It's crucial in writing essays. It's crucial in all the writing that you do, but particularly in feature writing, because you could always come back and fix it and make it better. Yeah. So that's the first paragraph there. And this is the one about Drake. Now, by the way, I said that this is description, scene setting, but it also, by the way, was an intriguing statement. So it was also a narrative anecdote opening. So I don't want you to get too hung up on these descriptions because these are different styles and different approaches you could use, but you could mix the approaches. You could mix the approaches. So it was a narrative anecdotal opening. An anecdote is a little story. So yes, there was a little story there. There was also setting the scene that was taking place, and there was a description of what was going on. And it was an intriguing, provocative, strong statement. So all 3 things were happening. So I want you to know that writing isn't just one thing. And in fact, if you could do all 3 of those things in your opening paragraph, you're actually writing a very good opening paragraph. Yeah. I just want to ask, because I know I'm doing a lot of talking. Does anyone have any questions for me? You could turn on your mic and ask, or you could ask it in the chat. I'm looking in the chat now if anybody has any questions, Or if you're good, I will go on. Yeah, okay. People are good? Yeah, all right, good. Yeah, good. So we're looking at this GQ piece now. So we looked at a GQ piece on Timothy Chalamet, and now we're looking at a GQ piece on Drake. Now, this is Drake when he was a younger artist, by the way. As you know, Drake's been around for a little while. He's still very popular. People know who he is. He's a Canadian rapper. This is when he lives in California. He lives in, I like that, Faith. So he isn't any good anymore? Oh, no. Oh, sorry. No, I'm reading no. I'm reading no because I thought you all were saying no, Drake isn't relevant anymore. But which he may not be. I have to tell you, I don't always know who's relevant at the time. But I want you to just look at this paragraph, and I'm going to give you all 10 seconds to read it, and then it continues on to the next slide. All right, so it starts here, and then it continues on to the next slide. So I'm just going to give you about 15 seconds to read this one, and then I'm going to flip to the next slide. So have a look at this one, read it here, absorb it, and then we're going to look at the next slide. All right, so in the last line, suddenly, bikinied women seem to materialize from thin air. Suddenly, bikinied women seem to materialize from thin air. And then it continues. Okay, so I think everyone has read it. So I just wanted to say that unlike the last scene, where a lot takes place in this opening paragraph, this particular feature article on Drake is a lot about scene setting. So you don't actually see or hear from Drake. You kind of hear about the atmosphere at his mansion. You hear about what's about to take place. You hear about his friends from Toronto. You hear about the physical setting and the physical atmosphere. So you hear about all that. There still is a good line or two in it. But again, this opening is not as strong, I would say, not as strong as the previous opening, but because Drake is, I would say, an international superstar, people are more inclined to perhaps stay with it. And people also are probably interested in what his life is like and where he lives and what that place looks like. I actually like this ending here, when it says a number. So these are the women who show up to his the pool party that's about to take place. It says it begins at 3 p.m, the pool party, about an hour after Drake wakes in his mansion in San Fernando Valley. And it talks about it being a stretch of hard work, and everyone is eager to have some fun and enjoy themselves. And when it talks about the bikinied women who materialize from thin air, and oddly now, it's starting to sound like a music video that you might watch, on YouTube. It's starting to almost be constructed like a music video that you watch on YouTube. And not, of course, every music video from a hip hop artist is like that, but you could think of a music video that might be like that, as if competing in a rap beauty pageant, right? And again, it plants imagery in your head. It's scene setting. It's layering with details. And then he starts to describe, the writer starts to describe the different women. Some are super chatty, some aloof, some full-bodied, some are thin. So I don't like this description particularly. Some are wispy as a tamarack. You'd have to know what a tamarack is, wispy, So again, an editor might have cleaned that up, but another editor might have said, this is a North American audience, they'll understand it. So let's keep it in. And when he says a number swan about as if in a museum or music video, firing their iPhone cameras while others take dramatic slow motion strolls by the pool, as if this all will soon be theirs. And it's an interesting idea because he almost presents to the reader the possibility that perhaps some of these women might be aspiring to have a long-term significant relationship with Drake. So they kind of have that aura about them. They have an aura of massive confidence, but also they kind of have that almost model aura as well, the aura of a supermodel. But this is an example of scene setting. Now, I want to ask, this last one about child marriage. Child marriage is not something fun to read about. I have to tell you, it's not something fun to read about. And because it's not fun to read about, it's going to create a certain amount of distress to read about it. You're going to read about it and you're going to say, wow, this is horrible that this is happening anywhere in the world and this is unfair. And you might be moved to action. You might be moved to join a social media movement to try and do something about it. You might be moved to post about it. You might be moved to tell others about it. You might be moved to prevent it happening in your own country and speak out against it. But because this particular article is not about anyone famous, the writing has to be very, very good. The writing has to be very good to keep you with this article and with this issue. And because this article is about Drake, this writer could afford to almost take a panoramic, and panoramic is a wide view. Before he gets down, yes, Kimura, very, very, very good. Kimura said persuasive. The article almost has to be persuasive. The article almost has to take a position. The article on child marriage almost has to take a position to fire, get you motivated to be almost an activist against it. Now, when I say motivated to be activist against it, you don't have to go and hold placards somewhere and protest, but you almost have to say, I wasn't fully aware that this was happening. And now that I hear and see it happening, I don't think that should really be happening. You know, I don't think that's fair to children. I don't think that's fair to put a child through that. That child has a right to a childhood, you know? And so it is persuasive in a way. It is argumentative in a way, Kimura. So you're right about that. But because this one is about Drake, what the writer is trying to do is give you a sense of what Drake's life is like. And therefore, it starts broad, and then it will narrow down to actually seeing Drake and hearing from him and hearing him talk and hearing about what his plans are for that day and how the party goes and who he meets and who shows up at the party and how he spends his day and how he does his work and what his aspirations are and what is and as you know, because of the type of artist Drake is, what his anxieties and pains are as well, because he writes about that in his work as well. So it's a different approach. Right? Now, last one I'll show you before we push on to the activity is an article on fathers, but it's an article that looks at fathers who have perhaps been abusive fathers, right? So it's an article from a magazine called Esquire, which is also a very famous magazine, Esquire magazine, and still around, and you can go on its website. Nearly all of its content is free nowadays. So it wrote this article, and I'll just show you. This article is 3 paragraphs, right? But I'm not going to go through all 3 paragraphs, but I just wanted to show you how it starts, right? And maybe I'll let you read 2 or 3 of the slides, and then we'll stop there and move on to but I want you to read, and again, this is on an issue. This is on an issue, and it's about fathers and how they may conduct themselves, right? So read this paragraph. I'll give you about 15 seconds, and then we jump to the next slide. Okay, go into the next slide. So the last line, right, and we'll go to the next slide now. Okay, and this is the last slide. This is the last slide of okay, so I think we have read all 3 slides. That was roughly 2 paragraphs. I didn't want the text to be too small for you all, so that's why I had to put it across 3 slides, right? Right, so I'm getting some, I want to see people respond on the chat here and say some things. Camellia, is that how you say your name? Camellia? Yeah. Yes, good, Camellia. So that's good. You say, is it about abuse or how to be a good parent? So it's about both. It's about both. It is about abuse, and it is about some of the things that Repetition was used. Yes, very good. Rhetorical questions at the end of the paragraph. Excellent. Yeah, good. So I see everyone's using what they know from English and English literature as well. And I liked what Kimura said at the beginning too, and the whole idea of going out to get the milk and then coming back. So I just going back to that first paragraph actually, and other persons could say other things as well. But and by the way, I want to emphasize something as well. So this is a magazine, Esquire magazine, and when you're writing a feature article, you think about your audience. So Esquire magazine is primarily a magazine targeted, aimed towards a largely male audience. So it's a magazine that writes about men issues, as is GQ. But of course, anyone can read it and anyone can find it interesting, and many people do read it, both men and women, young people, older people, and so forth, because you could read it and find it valuable. And that's why the website allows for anybody to just show up and read it. So you'll notice that there are two words that are a little bit daring. When I say daring, in it, but the persons, and that's why I say the tone, even though it's talking about something that's very serious and a little bit deep and a little bit painful, it's still conversational. It's still conversational. So sometimes it's using a bad word in there, like the A word and the P word and so forth. But when it's using those words, it's saying that that's how some people talk. That's how some people talk. And on a certain level, and again, you have with certain feature articles, it depends on the publication. Certain publications cannot use those words at all. It would not be acceptable. Each publication and each website has something called house style. House style. And it basically says, just like you have a school uniform and you have specific rules at your school, there's certain rules that govern a particular publication. And with Esquire magazine, they say, listen, we have an adult readership. And because we have an adult readership, we could afford to push the envelope a little bit and use a few bad words, but we're using it for a purpose. We're using it for a reason, and there's context in the way that we're using it. We're not using it, and I'm going to use a word here, gratuitously. To use something gratuitously is to just use it for the sake of shock value. So you're just using it for shock, you know, you're not using it for an actual purpose and for a reason. But here, whenever they use a bad word, they're actually using it kind of for a reason. It makes sense that they use it. And you could argue that they could have used another word, but they use that word particularly, right? Now, again, poetic license and artistic license. He says something in the opening line. There has been no greater villain in the story of mankind than the bad father, right? Now, that's not a fact. That's an opinion. But he starts with an opinion. There has been no greater villain in the story of mankind than the bad father. But it's interesting that he just starts by sharing an opinion that many people hold. And even if people don't hold that opinion, they say, okay, well, that's not my opinion, but I can see where you're coming from. I can see why you think that. That's not what I think, but I could see why you think that. And I guess that opinion does have some value for many people. That's not my experience, but perhaps it's your experience, and I could understand where you're coming from. And then it goes into a whole series of the one, now talking about bad fathers, the one who hits or humiliates, the one who doesn't show up, the one who leaves, the one who won't leave. So like, because you're almost wishing that they would leave, the drunk or the liar or the condescending prick. Bad fathers have ruined more lives than famine and war put together, bruising and battering their sons and daughters emotionally, mentally, and or physically, and dooming them to repeat this cycle generation after generation until kingdom come. Now, what I want you to see is there's a certain amount of anger in the way that this is written, and a little bit of venom as well, but it's written to almost draw you in. It's written actually to almost stoke your anger. And many people have not had the experience of having a bad father. So many of us have very good fathers. But even if we didn't have a bad father, we might have a friend, right? So men know this. We had friends growing up. So even if you haven't had a bad father, maybe you know a friend who's had that experience and you see the toll that it takes on that friend. So even though that person isn't your father, because you care for your friend, you don't want to see your friend in pain, you don't want to see your friend suffer, you don't want to have your friend have that level of emptiness that they're enduring. And therefore, you feel bad for them and you also react, and you're on their side, so you almost react against what they're reacting. Now, I want to say, and I'm just going to go back now to the exercise that we're about to do. I want to say that particularly with that article, and actually, let me just go back to the article. Sorry, let me just pull it back up for you. You'll notice that the way the opening paragraph ends up is that it comes to the current generation of people who are becoming fathers, and those boys who are growing into men and becoming fathers, and who may have had a bad father, might be making a concerted effort to be a good father, right? And again, this is a very long article. This article is about something like 3,000 words long, but this is the opening of it. And again, if you read 1,200 words, you've done well. Now, some people read this whole article and say, I found every single sentence of this article interesting. It meant something to me. There was value in it for me. And a lot of people prefer to study this way than to read a textbook. Because if you read this, you might actually read to the end. And if you read a textbook, you kind of go like, man, the way this textbook is written, it's so hard to read. It's so hard to stick with it. But this is almost written in a fashion where you can kind of go like, all right, well, I'm learning, but it's actually kind of interesting to read it as well. It's reading in a nice, smooth way. So feature articles on issues, and there are a multitude of them online. All of this is available online for free. You just have to track it down. If you're studying the environment, if you're studying pollution, if you're studying animal welfare, if you're studying dysfunctional families, whatever you're studying, you could track down a good feature article about it online and read the feature article. And sometimes reading the feature article gives you a nice understanding of the issue. And because the writing was of a high quality and it was actually interested, the writing was designed in a way to make you want to stay with it. You actually stayed with it and read the whole thing, and you became educated on the issue. And sometimes when you read a textbook, it's hard to stay with the textbook. So I would urge people in class to do your best to stay with your textbook. But sometimes before you approach your textbook, read a feature article on a particular issue, and it will help you to digest the information better in a textbook as well. Yeah. Let me just see what's saying in chat. Right. Good, Vanessa. I see you say, sir, I think he's not fit to be a father. When you say he's not fit to be a father, do you mean the person who's the author? You could say it in chat, or you could turn on your mic and tell us. Hey, Vanessa, I see you have your mic on. Go ahead. Okay, because I'm not hearing you, Vanessa, you could go ahead and just put it in the chat. But when you said, I think he's not fit to be a father, do you mean the author or just the person that they're writing about? Because they're writing about several different types of fathers, you know? But also they're writing about the person who is writing is saying that they aspire to be a certain type of father as well, you know? Yeah, I see that. I see that. Yeah, no, she certainly is. She is. Right. Thank you, Vanessa. That's perfect. Yes. The fathers that they're writing about. And in fact, many people become parents who probably didn't intend to become parents at all, and now are in a role that they are struggling to do well at, but that is a huge aspect of human life, you know. So I do want to now move across to the activity that we plan to, because I want to give everyone a little chance to do some writing. And I'm gonna share my screen here and give you an activity. Sorry. Okay, everyone. So I hope you all could see what I have in front of you right here. Sorry, just give me a second. Right. So I had three options, but I'm just going to give you this option because to go through three options would take some time. So I'm just giving you this option. You're going to try and write the first 2 to 3 paragraphs, I would say. I have here the first 3 to 4 paragraphs, but I would say try to write the first 2 to 3 paragraphs of this particular brief that I'm giving you, right? So I'm reading the brief here, right? You are a writer at a magazine. And when I say a magazine, I mean an online magazine, right? You are a writer at a magazine that is geared towards young professionals between the ages of 20 and 39. You are sitting in a meeting with your editor and other writers to brainstorm ideas for the magazine's next upload. Your editor says to the meeting, have you all heard of YOLO? And pretty much everyone has heard of YOLO, the acronym YOLO, which means you only live once. And everyone says yes. And she says, great. And then she says, I want a feature article written on FOMO. And FOMO, as you all know, is fear of missing out, right? So this is the part that I want you. She says it means fear of missing out. And because of rampant social media, we always have a sense of what everyone else is doing. So people are feeling like they're constantly missing out. The brief she gives you is as follows. You're to write an article of 700 to 800 words on the question, has social media created FOMO? Or is social media getting unfair blame for something that was always a major part of the human psyche? So is it social media that's creating FOMO? Or is it that we always had this sense of FOMO, this fear of missing out, this fear of not being included in things, right? Now, for people in class here today, you are only writing the first 2 to 3 articles, first 2 to 3 paragraphs, and possibly just 2 paragraphs. The first 2 paragraphs, I would say, because that's probably roughly what we have time for. The first 2 paragraphs on this question, which is, has social media created FOMO? Or is social media getting unfair blame for something that has always been a major part of the human psyche? And psyche is our minds, our psychology, and so forth. Now, I want to say that would not be the headline of the article. The headline of the article is often written after the article is completed. And then somebody reads the article and says, this would make a very good headline. And sometimes the person who wrote the article would suggest a headline. But this might be a lead-in line, like a strap line, like when we were looking at the article on the divorce between Jonas and his spouse, how there was a kind of lead-in line, and then you click on the link and then it leads you to the article. So has social media created FOMO, or is social media getting blamed for something that was always a major part of the human psyche, right? And we're going to read I'm going to try and write 2 paragraphs on that. Then I would like it to be the case that people, it is possible that you could share your screen and just show us what your paragraph looks like. We'll just read the opening paragraph of it. And if you want, you could just, if you only have 1 paragraph, that would be fine. That would be fine. You could try to write 2 paragraphs. If you get into a flow, you could write 2 paragraphs, but 1 paragraph is fine. It's fine for us to just look at. You could either share your screen and show us the paragraph, or you could just read it to us. But because people are having audio issues, it might just be fine just to show us the paragraph so we get a sense of your approach to writing this, what the brief is, right? So I'm going to keep the brief up so that people could look at it. And I'm going to give people, Sophia, how long generally would we give our class to work on this, you'd say? Because I'm
Well, it
looking at
depends. If you feel you need 20 minutes, 25 minutes, half hour, that's fine. What I will do is pause the recording while
right,
they do their exercise.
right. And we conclude at 12 o'clock, is that right?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So let me say to everyone, it is now 11 o'clock. Nearly 11 o'clock. It's 10:59, so it's basically 11 o'clock. Let me give you 20 minutes to work on this. Let me give you 20 minutes to work on this. Each of you, I'll leave the brief up. If you have any questions, you could ask me, but I'd give you about 20 minutes to try and write something. And listen, I want everyone to know that usually you would have a much longer time to write this. Please do not stress and feel self-conscious about what you've written. Remember what I said. Most of writing is rewriting. Most of writing is rewriting. So what you're writing now is not necessarily the final draft. This is just you putting down some ideas and trying to shape those ideas into words and sentences. And whatever it looks like now is fine. You could always fix it up. You could always edit it. You could always make it better. If you looked at it tomorrow, you'd probably have better ideas that you could infuse into it and change it up as you wish. So do not feel anyhow about what it looks like today, because I've just presented this to you, and you have very little time to come up with something. So don't put that pressure on yourself and feel self-conscious about it. I just want you to try. That's all I need you to do. I just want you to give it a try, have a go at it, see what you come up with, and then it could always be improved upon later. So you have 20 minutes to look at this, to write me, I'd say 2 paragraphs. If you only come up with 1, that's completely fine. If you end up going beyond 2, that's completely fine. But at least write 1 paragraph on this, and possibly 2. Yeah? Good. So I think what we will do, we'll perhaps pause the recording now. And I'll give you 20 minutes to work on it, and then come back. Great, everyone. So glad to have everyone back, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people have come up with. Remember, this was an exercise that I gave you very short notice about, so do not feel self-conscious about sharing. We're all colleagues here, and I consider students who are in Form 5 on the brink of joining colleges and universities and so forth. So anyone who's in Form 5 is about to join adult education. So I start seeing you in that light. So all we're doing is really sharing work with each other. And I, as the person who's facilitating the training today, I'm just going to make perhaps some suggestions as to what can be done to add some things to your work. But I am fully cognizant of the fact that what you've done, you've just come up with. You didn't have a ton of time to do, right? So let's start with, that's cool. That's Vanessa, that's completely fine. She says she's not finished, but she's still willing to share. So thank you very much. Let me start with the person who was finished the earliest. So I'll start with Faith, then I'll move to Kimora, then I'll move to Vanessa, and then anyone else who wishes to share can do so. I think my colleague Sophia has made it possible for us, every one of us, to share our screens. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
That's correct.
Yes.
Everyone can share.
Right. So Faith, you've gone ahead and shared with us. So Faith, I don't know how good your audio is, but do you want to try and read it out for us? If your audio isn't great, I'll read it out. But if you want, you could try and read it out for us.
So can you hear me properly?
No, I'm getting a lot of feedback. So let me try and read it out. Right? Thanks so much. So I'll give everyone just 10 seconds to read the first 2 paragraphs, and I'll read the first 2 paragraphs in my mind, and then I'll read it out. Right? Okay. So Faith, I like this. I've read it. So I'm going to read the first 2 paragraphs. As we delve into the heart of the matter, it becomes clear that FOMO has a great impact on the lives of persons as it has gained prominence in the digital age. In today's society, our connection with social media platforms provide us with an ongoing feed of other people's lives, their accomplishments and adventures, which can result in anxiety and a sense of missing out, has given rise to pervasive unease. And then you ask, but does social media bear the sole responsibility? Second paragraph, one might argue that FOMO is not of the digital age, but a part of human nature. Before the internet and smartphones, people still had a fear of being left out or even missing out on parties, events, or experiences. The question is, does social media serve as a magnifying glass for human securities? I would say, Faith, this is your best line. The question is, does social media serve as a magnifying glass for human insecurities? That's really good. That's really good. I also like this line lower down where you say, right, this leads to a lower self-esteem because it's as if we are watching a highlight reel of other people's lives while editing ours in real time, right? So of course, this is a first draft. We could always do things to just clean up some of because once you get to read it over, you could always get an opportunity to clean it up a little bit. But this line here, question, does social media serve as a magnifying glass for human insecurities, is interesting because what you're really getting at is the human securities exist before social media, but does social media magnify them and amplify them? And and because now you're seeing what everyone is doing and everyone is posting the best that they're doing. And in fact, there's another very good line here where you said, right, users may see an image of their friends or acquaintances living a perfect life, but behind the phone screen, they may not be living such a perfect life, right? So the idea of that what we're seeing is manufactured and it's stage managed and it's contrived and it's curated. You're almost like a person who's putting together an art gallery or a museum and you're curating, you're putting forward the best things, but no one's seeing what's happening behind the phone screen and no one's living what's happening behind the phone screen. You're not seeing that person's life. So I think you're actually handling this very well, Faith. The only thing I might have said was the opening line as we delve into the heart of the matter. You can almost jump in with a personal experience. You could almost jump in and say, and it mightn't be your experience, but you could say, I saw a classmate of mine posting pictures of playing mass last year, or playing mass and going to this party over the summer and traveling over the summer, and something about, and I don't want to presume, but if a person doesn't have access to those experiences, they might look at a classmate having those experiences and saying, wow, this person's living a very full and fulfilling life, and my experiences are quite limited. And it might make you feel worse about your own life. If you start an opening paragraph like that, perhaps, then what it does for the reader starts to say, okay, my author, the person who's writing this article, is sharing their own personal experience of FOMO. So it means that they have felt FOMO in their life, and now they're going to write about FOMO as a social phenomenon, but they're also sharing their own experience of FOMO, So that might be a strategy that you could contemplate. But I have to say, this is a very good first attempt. It's a very good first attempt. And I really like there are 3 lines in here. And the good thing about feature article is you always need 2 or 3 really excellent lines to make the reader kind of go like, yeah, this paragraph was worth reading to get to that line, and you really have that in that second paragraph. That paragraph is worth reading to get to that last line about the magnifying glass. And overall, it has a good flow to it. And as I said, we could always do things to clean up the text a little bit, but this is a very, very good first treatment of it. So thank you very much, Faith. Okay, good. So let's try Kimura.
So just telling you in advance, this is very short, but we tried to know.
That's cool.
Yeah, Kimar, I did it together. Yes.
Okay, good. So it's Kimura and Ashley, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good.
It's very short and it's just
That's fine. Short's good, Short's good. Remember, the age that we live in.
Yeah.
The age that we live in, people do not give you a lot of time,
The attention.
You know what? The audio with you all is actually pretty good. So I don't know if one of you wants to try and read it out.
Okay. All right. FOMO, the fear of missing out on what? Social media versus real life, the perfect life versus the ordinary life, all an illusion to add to FOMO. Social media did not produce FOMO, but merely added to it in recent times. To be clear, FOMO has always existed, but as a result of the excessive use of social media, this term FOMO has been brought to light. It is human nature to be scared of not experiencing life to the fullest. However, we all want to live and not just survive. This has always been a part of the human psyche. Therefore, social media is not solely responsible for the increasing appearance of FOMO, but has romanticized and created an illusion of what day-to-day life should look like.
Okay, very good, very good. I'm not sure which of you read that out, but that was a very good reading voice.
It was Kamara, and Ashley really helped us all with writing, so I feel like it.
Yeah. So I have to say I really like that last sentence, especially this. Therefore, social media is not solely responsible for the increasing appearance of FOMO, but has romanticized and created an illusion of what day-to-day life should look like. That's really good. Romanticized and created an illusion. A lot of people are living that illusion. A lot of people are chasing that illusion. A lot of people live to romanticize something is to take a day that was miserable and make it look beautiful. And, and to keep a superficial sort of mask on of seeming to live a fulfilling life, and by the way, it gets quite competitive. It gets quite competitive as well. And it gets competitive in terms of likes, in terms of followers, but it also gets competitive in terms of let me see if my experience can be better than your experience, and let me see if my videos and my pictures can be better than yours, and let me see if the comments and the following and the likes can be better than yours. So it is actually a tremendous amount of pressure that people are living under as well to be their own social media manager. And I think you get to that very nicely here too. The opening lines, I'm just looking at it again, FOMO, the fear of missing out. I like this actually. I like how conversational that opening line is. When you say FOMO, the fear of missing out, and I like the suspension dots, the fear of missing out on what? You understand? Like that's a really nice start, I think. FOMO, the fear of missing out on what? Social media versus real life. So I like that on what, because what that does is, to a certain degree, is kind of ask, what's the point of all this anxiety? What's the point of of yearning? What are you yearning for? What do you think you're missing out on? You do also have your own independent life, and you could do what you want with it. You don't have to keep looking at other people's lives and then comparing it to yours. So I like the starkness of that opening sentence. FOMO, the fear of missing out. On what? Missing out on what? And then social media versus real life. So again, you almost kind of say artificial life versus your actual life that you're living. The perfect life versus the ordinary life. So again, I like the juxtaposition of these two ideas, the perfect life versus the ordinary life. I like that you use the quotations for ordinary life, because almost to say, what's wrong with the ordinary life? Everyone's living an ordinary life. Everyone's living a life that has struggle and has complexity, and that we have to, everyone feels tired and everyone feels exhausted and everyone feels sad and everyone, that the ordinary life is a wide spectrum of human emotions. And I like that you kind of emphasize the perfect life versus the ordinary life, the manicured, manufactured life versus real life, right?
Yes, so that's what I'm guessing at, really. We're trying to, at least.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I would say, again, and the same advice I gave to Faith, you see, like in the child marriage paragraph that we looked at, what made the child marriage paragraph have an emotional pull on us is that there were people in it, Danraj and Sharma, 4-year-old, 7-year-old, 4-year-old crying, or the 4-year-old falling asleep on his mother's lap, the 7-year-old crying and having to be appeased with a piece of fruit. Something about having people, and the phrase I'm going to use here is flesh and blood. You put flesh and blood into your article, you put people into your article, and people take that individual, and that individual becomes representative of a larger group of people. So one individual's pain becomes, there's a type of universality to it. When I say universality, you almost see that one individual's pain or the sense that that person is missing out. You know, you say, listen, one of my classmates went to Paris this summer and posted 100 photos on it, and I kept following it even though I didn't want to. After a while, it was nice to follow. I was glad for her. I was glad to see it, but it also made me feel a bit empty. And part of it made me aspire to one day have that, but part of me also made me understand that it's not the easiest thing to have. And you didn't know, you were kind of divided about whether you wanted to participate in watching or not watching. And because of the somewhat addictive nature of social media, you almost are compelled to keep watching, even though it's not doing you any good. It might be not doing your mental health any good. And maybe if you talk about that, and by the way, it doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be you. You could say for the article, a person, another class, another school, another part of the country, was having this experience, or even a person that was talking about it online or on YouTube, a person was talking about their experiences with FOMO. And you import it into your article and say, this emptiness or this anxiety or this sense of living an unfulfilled life. If you talk about that one individual's pain, it will seem representative of many people experiencing this, So I like what you have, definitely. And somewhere in the article, sometimes at the beginning, sometimes very soon after the beginning, you want to start talking about actual people going through the experience. But I like the hard-hitting nature of the opening. I like the style of the opening, the short sentences, the in-your-face style. I really like that. I think that was very good. And then that last line about the romanticizing and creating the illusion and that sort of thing. You have the elements there for sure. And it is a good read. But I do want to say that anybody writing a feature article, you can always, if you think of the one on the fathers, there still is that anonymous villainous figure in there. Their children that might be nameless and faceless, but you still see them in there. You know, you still kind of see them being abused, being hit, being yelled at, being that tyrannical father sitting down in silence and seeing almost creating havoc through silence, you know. So that sort of any article is always improved by the presence, by that human presence, you know. Good. Kimura, let me just read your. Yeah, no, I know the time is really tight, actually. And actually, I really appreciate that this was a collective writing effort. It was a joint writing effort, but joint writing efforts also take a little time too, because you got to get two styles to merge, you know. But this was very good though. I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for sharing it. I wanna move on to Vanessa now. Vanessa, if you're there. And Vanessa, no matter what, I don't know if your audio is good enough for you to read, but if you're not, we could read it. So you could take a try at reading it, but if the audio isn't holding up, I could read it for you.
Are you hear me?
I am. There's a little bit of feedback.
I immediately began.
Okay, no, don't worry. All right, Kimura and Ashley, thank you so much for coming. It was really enjoyable having you both.
So I don't know if you can see us, but we'll just say bye.
Actually, I think your camera is just blocked by something that's blocking your camera. If you shift that, then I would be able to see you both.
Let me see if we can.
It's probably just something at the top of the camera that's just blocking. Like I could do it right here. So, see, I could block my camera there.
Oh, I don't know why is that happening.
I think it might just be an issue.
It might just be an issue with the camera.
It might be a safety thing.
Okay, yeah. So bye.
Bye, sir.
Thank you. Enjoy your workshop.
Thanks so very much for coming.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
Cool. Great. So Vanessa, I'm gonna go ahead and read it, but before I read it, I'm letting everyone in class just who's here with us still please have a look at it and take about 15 seconds and read it silently, and then I'll read it out loud. Hey, Vanessa. Right. I want to say, I'm going to read it out loud now. It says, I immediately begin doing some research online. There seems to be tons of information and studies of FOMO. The phrase FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out, has been commonplace in the worlds of social media and marketing. It describes the anxiety that many people experience when they believe they are constantly missing out on something fun, exciting, or important. But as I dive deeper into researching FOMO, I started to realize that while the concept itself may not be new, the intensity, the frequency, and the all-consuming nature of it in today's increasingly connected and fast-paced world really can be seen as unprecedented. Yeah. So, Vanessa, this is a very, very good attempt. Really, really excellent. The writing is very smooth, very intelligent, very elegant writing, I would say. Very clean, you know. When I say clean, almost mistake-free. I would say just right here, just here you'd need to fix the all-consuming nature, right? So just the and then all-consuming nature. But it's really a good read. It's really a good read. I want to tell you, and as I said, it's quite intellectual, but not intellectual in an off-putting way. I actually like very much in that first sentence that you use the word tons. There seems to be tons of information and studies of FOMO. So in feature writing, you do have the license, the artistic license or the writer's license to be a little casual. You could be a little casual because you're trying to write in a way that the reader feels like you're almost having a conversation with them. And that is now, of course, you can't write the whole thing like that. And you shouldn't write the whole thing like that, but you could put little touches into the writing that allow the reader to feel almost like they're talking with you, you know? And if they feel like they're talking with you, they're more likely to keep your company and stay with you and stay with the article, right? Now, the only thing I would say is that this paragraph here, your first paragraph and your second paragraph, actually are very good paragraphs. This paragraph should be the second paragraph, and this paragraph should be the third paragraph. And you still have a first paragraph to write. So, you see how it says, I immediately began doing some research online. The first paragraph could be about someone experiencing FOMO. Maybe yourself, maybe a friend, maybe a sister, maybe a brother, maybe a cousin experiencing FOMO. And by the way, it doesn't have to be something that actually happens in real life. It could be something that you almost simulate creatively, you know, because sometimes you read about people experiencing FOMO, and you might read about 4 or 5 people experiencing FOMO, and then you create a composite character that kind of takes in elements of them experiencing FOMO. So if you talk about in the opening paragraph someone experiencing FOMO, and then lead in with, I immediately began doing research online. The reason you immediately began doing research online is because either you experienced it yourself, or your best friend experienced it, or someone you care about experienced it, and it made you begin doing research online. And then you talk to us about what FOMO is. And this last paragraph here, but as I dive deeper into researching FOMO, I started to realize that while the concept itself may not be new, the intensity, this is new. And this is what I like that you put out there. The concept is not new, but the intensity, the frequency, and the all-consuming nature of it in today's increasingly connected and fast-paced world really can be seen as unprecedented. So it's not new, but it's never been worse than it is now. That's what this paragraph is saying. So this is a great second paragraph. This is a great third paragraph. And you would create a first paragraph. And that's how writing often goes, by the way. When you write and you put it down, you kind of look at it and you go like, you know what? These are good paragraphs, but they're not my opening paragraph. It's not my opening line. They're good paragraphs. I'm going to use them, but they're not going to be my first paragraph. My first paragraph is my first engagement with that reader, and I don't want them to leave. I want them to stay. I want them to be part of this article. I want them to read the rest of it. So that opening paragraph has to be the pull, you know? Just looking at the chat here. Yeah, but I have to say, Vanessa, I really like this. I really like this. It's really, it's deep and it's intelligent and it's well done. So, and I have to say, and Vanessa, you're from, it's Superior West, is that secondary? Yeah, I think it's you and your colleagues from Superior. Yeah, I think this is really a good effort. This is really a good effort. Good. Now, I think we are, you could stop sharing now if you wish, Vanessa. I think we are closing in on 12 o'clock. It's now 11:53. So I think now might be a good time. I am really pleased with what I saw. The people who were able to share, they really were quite enjoyable. And I wouldn't be able to look at every single example or effort that you all made. But I want to thank each and every one of you for trying to make that effort and for trying to engage with this concept. The person who invented the acronym FOMO also created an acronym called FOBO, which is not as well known as FOMO. FOBO actually stands for fear of better options. Fear of better options. And they also created something called FODA, I believe. FODA, which is fear of doing anything, you know? So you could always look up that person online, the person who created the phrase FOBO, and see what they were trying to do. I believe it was a Harvard student who had created it and created the other acronyms, but FOMO became quite famous. I want to thank everyone for being part of this workshop today. It really was enjoyable working with you all and sharing your company. I think I don't think I've met anyone from your secondary school before, but now I'm very happy to say that I have met you, and I now know people from your secondary school. And I have to say, if other people in your secondary school are like you, then it must be a really excellent school with excellent people in it, because it really was, I really enjoyed how much you participated and how closely you listened and how focused you were. And I hope you enjoyed today's workshop. And remember, it's a workshop. I am a lecturer at COSTAATT. I'm in the Ken Gordon School of Communication, Creative Industries, and Digital Media. I teach in the journalism program there, and I teach in the communication studies program. And we also have an advertising and promotion degree. We also have certificate degrees, and certificate degrees are shorter degrees. They're one year long. We have associate degrees that are 2 years long, and then of course we have bachelor's degrees, which are 4 years long, full-time. And we hope to see some of you there someday. But this is a sampling of what you get at COSTAATT. The work that we did today is a sampling of what you get at COSTAATT, and is a sampling of what you get if you do one of our degree programs, particularly from our school, which is called the Ken Gordon School of Communication Studies, Creative Industries, and Digital Media. So everyone, thank you so much again for being with us today.